My name is Cassandra Henderson, but most people call me Cassie. I turned 32 last month. To anyone passing through Lake Forest, the wealthy suburb where I grew up, my family looked like a postcard. Our two-story colonial home stood on a manicured lawn with trimmed hedges, a white fence, and a three-car garage that gleamed with new models every few years. Neighbors admired us. The Hendersons, they'd say, the picture of success. But inside those walls, the picture was painted with different shades, one child framed in gold, the other left in shadows. My older brother Jack was the golden child. 3 years my senior, he had everything a son in a family like ours was expected to have: talent on the baseball field, charm that impressed teachers, and the kind of ambition my father understood. I was different. I loved dirt under my nails, the quiet patience of tending to seeds, the slow miracle of watching something grow. One of my earliest memories is of us both at 8 years old. Jack was outside swinging a bat in a brand new batting cage Dad had installed in our backyard. I was in the corner, kneeling over a little wooden box I'd turned into a vegetable patch. I remember Dad leaning against the fence, his suit jacket still on from work, pride swelling in his voice. "Look at that swing, Diane. Our boy has real talent." And then his eyes flicked toward me. His expression softened into indifference. "Cassie, don't track mud into the house again. That's not play, that's just making a mess." Those words cut deeper than I knew how to admit at 8. My mother reinforced the script. She loved status appearances, the social currency of polished children. Jack's trophies lined our mantelpiece like a gallery of promise. My science ribbons, certificates for environmental projects, even the medal I won in a local innovation fair. They were tucked in drawers. If I wanted them displayed, I had to ask. And even then, they were placed in corners, never center stage. By middle school, the disparity was so clear it almost felt scripted. Jack made the honor roll. He was rewarded with courtside seats at a Chicago Bulls game. I made the same honor roll. Mom smiled briefly and said, "That's what we expect." Christmas mornings were a study in comparison. When Jack turned 16, there was a brand new sports car waiting in the driveway with a bow so large it seemed absurd. My 16th A used sedan with Dad's practical explanation. "You just need something to get around. No need for anything flashy." It wasn't the money, it was the message. If Jack stumbled, they caught him and built a cushion beneath his fall. If I succeeded, it was expected ordinary, unworthy of fuss. There was, however, one person who saw me, my grandmother Eleanor, Dad's mother. She was a farmer's daughter who had left the fields of southern Illinois long ago, but never lost her connection to the earth. Her backyard, smaller than ours, bloomed with every herb and flower you could name. When I visited, she would press a trowel into my hand like it was a baton being passed in a relay. "Not everyone measures success with a $, she'd whisper while guiding my hands through soil. "Some of us measure it by how much good we put back into the earth." Her words stayed with me longer than my parents' dismissals ever did. When Mom rolled her eyes at the mud on my shoes, Grandma Eleanor chuckled. "Soil is proof of work well done." She fed my fascination with gifts my parents never thought to give: packets of rare seeds, gardening tools sized for my hands, books on sustainable agriculture. I devoured every page, every lesson. One spring afternoon, I proudly showed her the small bean sprouts climbing a stick in my garden. She cupped my face with her weathered hands, eyes bright as sunlight through leaves. "You have a gift, Cassie. Don't ever let anyone bury it. Promise me you won't let them smother this part of you. Someday they'll need you more than you'll need them." At the time, I laughed, not understanding the weight of her words. I thought she just meant that vegetables were useful when grocery stores ran out of lettuce. But now, years later, I realized she foresaw the battles to come. Meanwhile, my parents' favoritism for Jack only grew. When he struck out in a championship game at 12, Dad reassured him, "Even the best stumble. You're destined for greatness." When I placed first in a regional science fair, Dad shook his head and said, "That's nice, but don't get too carried away with this hobby." I remember sneaking my ribbon onto the mantel one night while everyone slept. In the morning, it was gone. I found it tucked in my desk drawer, folded and bent, as though even the wood frame couldn't justify a place beside Jack's trophies. By the time I reached high school, I had learned the truth in my parents' eyes. Worth wasn't about effort or passion or the quiet ways you nurtured life. Worth was about flash applause and fitting neatly into the image they had crafted for the Henderson family. But I also learned something else. I could either keep chasing their approval, always one step behind Jack, or I could chase something else, something of my own. I chose the latter. Still, that choice came with loneliness. Family dinners felt like rehearsals of Jack's highlights, each course served with a fresh reminder of where I fell short. Mom would beam as she retold his victories. Dad would toast to his future. And me, I learned to make my silence into armor. Only Grandma noticed. After one dinner, where Jack was praised for making varsity, and I sat unseen with my science project folder on my lap, Grandma pulled me aside in the kitchen. "They'll never look at you the way you want, Cassie," she said softly, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of lavender and earth. "But that doesn't mean you don't shine. It just means you'll shine somewhere else." That night, lying awake, I whispered into the dark, "One day I'll make something they can't ignore." I didn't know then whether it was a promise or a plea, but I knew it was the seed of something bigger than me. And seeds, when buried, don't die, they grow. High school should have been the time when I finally stepped out of Jack's shadow. In some ways I did, but every step forward came with a reminder that in my family, there was only one story worth celebrating, and it wasn't mine. By freshman year, Jack was already a legend in our household. Star pitcher on the baseball team, honor roll student, charming enough to win over every parent at booster events. Dad bragged about him at work. Mom arranged photo spreads in the family newsletter for the country club. And me, I was the kid lugging bags of soil across the backyard, setting up experiments with recycled soda bottles and PVC pipes, trying to see how high I could coax beans and cucumbers to grow. It was in 10th grade that I designed my first real vertical gardening system, a towering frame with shelves of plants climbing upward, watered through a drip system I pieced together with old tubing. When my science teacher saw it, his eyes widened. "Cassie, this isn't just a project. This is innovation. You could win regionals with this." And I did. My project caught the attention of a local paper, which ran a small feature with the headline, "Teen Creates Vertical Farming Model for Small Spaces." My classmates teased me about being plant girl, but I didn't care. I had built something with the potential to solve real problems. The night the article came out, I carried the newspaper home, heart pounding. Maybe this would finally be the moment when my parents looked at me the way they looked at Jack. I laid the paper on the dinner table. "Look, Dad, Mom, they featured my project." Dad didn't even look up from his steak. "That's nice, but it's just a school project." Mom added, "Speaking of projects, Jack, did you tell us about the recruiter from Northwestern who spoke to your coach?" Jack launched into details about a potential scholarship. The article with my name on it slipped under a placemat unnoticed. That night I cried quietly into my pillow, the newsprint crumpled in my hands. I wasn't surprised, just tired. Grandma Eleanor, though, she noticed. She clipped the article, framed it, and hung it in her kitchen. "Your father doesn't understand what you're building," she told me as we shared tea. "But I do. Don't let their blind spots dim your light." Her words wrapped around me like armor. Junior year came with another milestone. I was invited to present at a state-level science fair. My vertical garden system won first place and even drew the attention of a small, sustainable farming magazine which interviewed me. At the award ceremony, I scanned the audience. Grandma was in the front row, beaming her hands, clapping until they turned red. My parents sat stiffly in the back aisles, darting to their watches. When another parent congratulated Dad on my win, he forced a smile and said, "It's just a phase. Jack's the real achiever. He's applying to Wharton next year." I pretended not to hear, but I heard every word. It was around then that Grandma started to look smaller. The cancer diagnosis hit like a thunderclap. Aggressive, the doctor said. Time was limited. I began spending weekends at her house, even school nights when she was in the hospital. I'd bring homework, sit beside her bed, and read aloud from my textbooks while she dozed. Sometimes she'd wake and take my hand. "Promise me something, Cassie," she whispered one evening, her voice faint but steady. "Promise you'll follow your heart. Your father lost his way chasing money. Don't make the same mistake." "I promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. Those words became the compass of my life. 3 weeks before my high school graduation, she passed away. I can still see her garden blooming behind the house, tulips and herbs spilling from every corner, as if the earth itself refused to let her go quietly. At the funeral, relatives huddled in small groups. I overheard one whisper Michael always said Jack would carry the family. Cassandra's just eccentric like Eleanor. Always had her head in the dirt. I clenched my fists, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not in front of them. Instead, I stood by her grave later alone, pressing my palm into the freshly turned soil. "I promised you, Grandma," I whispered. And I'll keep it, even if they never see me, even if they never believe in me. I'll make you proud. The day of graduation arrived like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. Jack walked across the stage to thunderous applause. Mom dabbed her eyes. Dad clapped so hard his palms must have stung. When my name was called, the applause was polite, almost perfunctory. I smiled anyway, gripping the diploma as if it were more than just a piece of paper. It was proof. Proof that I could walk without their applause. That night, as I sifted through college brochures in my room, I felt a hollow ache. My acceptance letter from the University of Illinois, with its strong environmental science program, was pinned to the wall. Jack's acceptance to Northwestern's business school had already warranted a catered party. I held Grandma's gardening gloves in my hands, still smelling faintly of earth. They were too big, rough against my skin, but comforting. I made myself a vow, then stronger than any I'd made before. I will not trade my soul for their approval. I will walk the path you saw in me, even if I have to walk it alone. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of laughter from Jack's room as he celebrated on the phone with friends. I stared out my window into the darkness, imagining the soil beneath the earth. Silent, patient, alive. Seeds waiting. I was a seed too, and one day I would break through. The summer before college, our house buzzed with excitement, but not for me. Jack had officially accepted his spot at Northwestern's prestigious business program, and my parents decided it warranted a full-blown celebration. They rented out a banquet hall, invited colleagues, neighbors, and even some minor local politicians. Toasts flowed like champagne to Jack, the future titan of finance. I meanwhile had taped my University of Illinois acceptance letter above my desk. No party, no toast, no fuss. Over breakfast, Mom said, "That's nice, dear. It'll keep you busy," as though I'd announced I was joining a pottery class. I wanted to scream, "It's not just busy work, it's my life's calling," but the words caught in my throat. When August rolled around, the disparity became even clearer. My parents toured Jack's brand new downtown apartment, a glossy 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows. They covered his tuition furniture, monthly allowance, even a car for him to commute in style. For me, tuition and a dorm room. The rest I'd have to figure out myself. Dad's parting words as he dropped me at the dorm. "Consider this a lesson in independence. Jack needs resources for networking. You will. You'll learn responsibility." I smiled tightly, clutching my second-hand comforter and the box of gardening books Grandma had left me. Responsibility wasn't new to me. It was all I'd ever been allowed. Those first months at Illinois were a blur of exhaustion. Between classes, I worked 20 hours a week at the campus sustainability office, answering phones, filing reports, and eventually helping with small research projects. My dorm was tiny, my meals frugal. Sometimes dinner was nothing but rice and beans. Meanwhile, Jack's life looked like a glossy magazine spread. Fraternity formals, private dinners, with investment bankers. Dad introduced him to weekends in Lake Forest with catered brunches. His social media was a collage of tuxedos and champagne. Mine, photos of seedlings growing under fluorescent lamps in the university greenhouse. Still in those cramped labs and dirt-streaked plots, I felt alive. It was during a freshman seminar that I met Professor Diana Williams. She was everything my parents weren't: sharp-eyed, deeply curious, and utterly uninterested in appearances. After reviewing my high school project on vertical gardening, she leaned across her desk and said, "Cassie, this isn't just clever, it's scalable. Have you considered how this could change urban food deserts?" No one had ever asked me that before. I thought about it, I stammered, but I don't know if anyone would take it seriously. Her lips curved into a rare smile. "Then let's make them." Under her mentorship, I began refining my system. I added better irrigation, experimented with nutrient solutions, and kept meticulous records. By sophomore year, I was presenting my designs at campus sustainability fairs. My system even won a small grant, $15,000 more money than I'd ever touched. I called home that night, brimming with excitement. "Dad, I got a grant for my project, $15,000. They're implementing it in a community garden near campus." There was a pause. Then Dad chuckled. "That's great, honey. But you know, Jack just landed a summer internship at Goldman Sachs. That's the kind of opportunity that really sets you up." Mom's voice chimed in from the background. "Jack's boss says he has leadership written all over him." I swallowed hard. Right. Congratulations to him. The rest of dinner talk that weekend revolved around Jack's trajectory, salaries, bonuses, promotions. He hadn't even gotten yet, but they were already certain of. My grant, the project I'd poured my soul into, wasn't worth more than a fleeting nod. It hurt, but it also hardened me. If they couldn't see value in my work, I'd just have to prove it elsewhere. Life at Illinois wasn't easy. While Jack breezed through on allowances and family connections, I scraped together side jobs, babysitting, tutoring, even waiting tables at a cafe near campus. Every dollar went toward lab supplies, textbooks, or rent for the small off-campus room I moved into junior year. Still, I thrived academically. My GPA soared and my name appeared in departmental newsletters. Professor Williams began inviting me to closed research meetings. One evening, after reviewing my data, she tapped her pen against the page and said, "Cassie, you're not just a student anymore. You're a researcher." The words filled me with a quiet pride that no family approval could have matched. But pride didn't pay bills, and loneliness pressed in like a shadow. Jack posted pictures with his fraternity brothers under neon lights while I spent Friday nights in the lab, hands stained with soil. When my friends invited me out, I often declined, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't spare the money. There were moments in the silence of my rented room when I wondered if Dad was right. Maybe I was wasting potential on glorified gardens. Maybe I should have followed the safe path like Jack. But then I'd open Grandma's gardening journal, filled with notes in her slanted handwriting. Give back to the earth, and it will give back to you. And I'd remember my promise. One spring afternoon, as I knelt beside my experimental vertical towers, sunlight slanting through the greenhouse glass, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt purpose. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it mattered. By the time graduation loomed, the divergence between Jack's and my worlds was undeniable. Jack finished his business degree with a job already secured at a prestigious financial firm in Chicago, thanks, of course, to Dad's connections. His starting salary was higher than anything I could imagine. I graduated with honors in environmental science, specializing in sustainable agriculture. My diploma felt like a badge of survival. During the ceremony, I scanned the crowd. Jack's side of the family roared with applause when his name was called. When mine was announced, the cheers were softer. My parents clapped politely, eyes already shifting back to Jack. Afterward, Mom hugged me with a practiced smile. "We're proud of you, sweetheart." "So what will you do with this environmental science degree?" Her tone made it sound like a hobby, not a profession. "I'm looking into nonprofit work," I explained carefully. "Community gardens, sustainable food programs." Dad cut me off with a sigh. "At your age, I was already climbing the ranks in banking. Don't waste time chasing ideals. Find something practical, secure." Jack, dressed in a sleek suit, even under his graduation gown, clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't listen too much to them. Congrats, sis." His words were kind, but his smile carried a hint of pity. That night, as I packed my boxes, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning. They don't see it yet, but they will." The seed was still buried, still unseen, but I could feel it pushing upward, straining toward the light. After graduation, Jack's trajectory soared, just as everyone expected. He walked straight from the commencement stage into a high-rise office in downtown Chicago, his six-figure salary practically announced in the local business pages. Dad called him every other day, advising him on investments, congratulating him on joining the real world. Mom beamed at country club luncheons, telling her friends Jack is already making a name for himself. For me, the world looked different. I sent out dozens of applications to environmental nonprofits, agricultural labs, and sustainability programs. Most positions were unpaid or barely above minimum wage. Months stretched into an anxious blur until one afternoon an email finally landed in my inbox. Urban Harvest, a nonprofit focused on community gardens in underserved Chicago neighborhoods, was offering me an internship. I was ecstatic. The work aligned perfectly with my passion, practical, hands-on, and meaningful. I called home to share the news. An unpaid internship. Dad's disappointment crackled through the line. At your age, Jack was already earning six figures. I swallowed. This gives me experience in the exact field I want. It's a stepping stone. Mom's voice softened, but was no less cutting. Darling, have you thought about getting an MBA instead? You could do something more stable, more respectable. I pressed my lips together. Respectable. That was the word they always dangled like a carrot, just out of reach. Respectable meant following their script, not mine. I moved into a tiny studio apartment with a leaky radiator and cracked windows. The rent ate half my modest savings, and I lived on beans, rice, and instant noodles. The neighborhood was rough sirens at night, peeling paint on the hallways, but it was mine. More importantly, it was free from their judgment. When Mom came to help me move in, she wrinkled her nose at the building's chipped facade. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We only want what's best for you." I stood in the middle of the bare room mattress on the floor, boxes stacked like walls around me, and replied quietly, "We just disagree about what best looks like." At Urban Harvest, I learned humility. My days were spent hauling soil bags, planting seedlings in neglected lots, teaching children how to water herbs, and presenting to neighborhood boards skeptical about outsiders fixing problems. My salary once the internship ended and I became a project assistant was a modest $28,000 a year. But when I watched a child's face light up pulling a carrot from the earth, for the first time I knew I was in the right place. Still, the comparisons haunted me. At family dinners, conversations orbited Jack. Promotions, bonuses, the expensive condo he was buying in Lincoln Park. Dad would lean back, swirling his Scotch pride, radiating. "Jack has always made practical choices," he'd say, as if to underline every impractical step I had ever taken. When I tried to mention a community project I had led, revitalizing a food desert block into a thriving garden, Mom nodded politely, then pivoted to Jack's new Rolex. I sat at the table, hands folded in my lap, invisible. One evening, after yet another dinner, where my work had been treated as a quaint hobby, I walked back to my studio through the freezing wind, tears stinging my cheeks. I unlocked my door, stepped into my cold, dim room, and sat on the mattress. I pulled out the small wooden box where I kept Grandma Eleanor's gardening gloves, frayed and faded. I slid them on and whispered into the silence, "I promised you. I won't give up." The next morning, I dragged myself to the garden site, exhausted but determined. The soil was still frozen stubborn, but so was I. Over the years, I worked my way from intern to coordinator, then project manager. My salary barely scraped by Chicago standards, but I lived frugally, patching up clothes, skipping vacations, cooking at home. My reward was seeing 7 community gardens flourish, families gaining access to fresh produce, neighborhoods transformed. Meanwhile, Jack's world glittered. His Instagram glowed with yacht trips, Michelin star dinners, tailored suits. He drove sleek cars while I took the bus with dirt under my fingernails. But the biggest wound came one spring night. Urban Harvest had just piloted my vertical growing system in a struggling community on the south side. The project received a feature in a sustainability magazine. My picture was on the cover, smiling beside towers of lettuce. My colleagues surprised me with cupcakes in the office. Buoyed, I went home that weekend, eager to share. Over roast chicken, I showed my parents the magazine. They featured my design. It's making real impact. We're reducing water use by 60%. It's innovative. "That's wonderful," Mom said absently, already turning to Jack. "Did you tell Cassie about your year-end bonus? It's enough for a down payment." The conversation shifted. My magazine cover was forgotten on the table, butter dripping onto it from the bread basket. I stared at it, then folded it quietly and slipped it back into my bag. In that moment, I realized something: I wasn't going to get applause here. Not for this life, not for this work. And maybe that was okay, because applause doesn't make seeds grow. By the time I turned 25, family dinners had become rare events. When I did attend, it was only because some unspoken guilt tugged at me. Most evenings ended with me walking home through the city streets, head bowed against the wind, trying to convince myself their words didn't matter. Then came the night of Jack's engagement dinner. Amanda was her name. The daughter of one of Dad's golf club friends, she worked in luxury marketing and wore her privilege like perfume, subtle but unmistakable. She was beautiful, charming, and the kind of woman my parents had always dreamed Jack would marry. Mom called it the social event of the season. She wasn't exaggerating. The house gleamed as though it were auditioning for a magazine spread, polished silver towering floral arrangements, crystal glasses that only came out for special occasions. Caterers bustled in pressed uniforms. Every detail screamed perfection. I arrived early, clutching a bottle of modest wine, already feeling out of place. Jack greeted me with a hug, brief but sincere. "Thanks for coming, Cass. It means a lot to Amanda." His fiancée smiled politely, sizing me up with the cool curiosity of someone assessing a stranger. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," she said. Her tone was smooth, practiced, but her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. As guests poured in, colleagues, family, friends, Amanda's polished relatives, I realized I recognized no one. No one from my world, no one who'd ever touched the soil under their nails. I floated through the evening like a ghost. Dinner was a parade of toasts. Laughter filled the air as stories of Jack's childhood were retold. His first home run, his college internships, his career triumphs. Amanda was praised as radiant refined, the perfect addition to the Henderson legacy. I sat quietly, my champagne glass untouched. Then Dad stood up for what was clearly intended as the final toast. His voice, thick with pride, carried across the room. Family is everything. Nothing matters more than seeing your children succeed and build lives we can be proud of. Jack has always made us proud. He raised his glass toward my brother from his first steps to his last promotion. And now, as he prepares to start his own family, we want to help lay the foundation. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as Dad pulled a white envelope from his jacket. He handed it to Jack, who opened it, eyes widening. Amanda peeked inside her perfect makeup, unable to hide the delighted shock. $230,000, Dad announced. A down payment for a home worthy of the family you're building together. Applause thundered around the table. Guests clinked glasses. Jack smiled sheepishly. Amanda kissed his cheek. Mom dabbed at tears. I sat frozen champagne glass halfway to my lips, my pulse hammering. $230,000. More money than I would see in years, given freely, proudly, publicly to my brother. Meanwhile, I was stretching every paycheck, rationing groceries, skipping heating bills. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it meant. That night, after dessert plates were cleared and the band began playing soft jazz, I slipped into the kitchen to help the caterers tidy up. I needed air. I needed space. That's when I heard them. My parents' voices drifting from the butler's pantry. A perfect evening, Mom sighed. Everyone was so impressed with Jack and Amanda. They make such a handsome couple. He's done everything right, Dad agreed. The clink of ice in his glass. The right school, the right career, the right girl. We couldn't ask for more. There was a pause long enough to still my hands as I stacked plates. At least one of our children isn't a failure, Dad said. His voice was lower now, but clear enough. The plate in my hand slipped clattering against the counter. My chest tightened as the word echoed failure. Mom's voice wavered. She's still young, Michael. Maybe she'll come around. I doubt it. She's stubborn, just like my mother was. Encouraging all that gardening nonsense put foolish ideas in her head. She could have chosen something practical. Instead, she's wasting her potential. The words cut sharper than any blade. After years of subtle dismissals, this was confirmation of what I had always feared in their eyes. I was nothing. I set the plate down carefully, my hands trembling, and stepped into the doorway. Their faces froze caught mid-conversation, guilt flickering across their eyes. Cassie, Mom began, her social smile sliding into place. We were just coming to find you for the toast. No, you weren't, I said, my voice steady though my chest ached. You were talking about me, about what a failure I am. Dad straightened, defensive. You misunderstood. We were just concerned. No, I cut him off. I understood perfectly. You think Jack deserves $230,000 because he followed your approved life plan. And me, I'm a failure because I chose work that matters to me instead of money. Mom's voice softened, placating. That's not fair. Jack has made practical choices. We just worry about your future. My future, I shot back, is building food systems for communities that need them. That's not good enough for you. That's not respectable. Dad's face hardened. Enough of this childish idealism. You had a good education, and you've wasted it. These gardens will never provide real security. I laughed bitterly. Security. You think sitting in a glass tower chasing bonuses is more valuable than feeding families who can't find fresh food. That's your definition of worthwhile. Someone has to live in the real world, Dad snapped. Why should we invest in your future when you've chosen to throw it away? The word failure hung in the air, louder than any applause from the dining room. I took a deep breath, a strange calm settling over me. Thank you, I said quietly. Thank you for making your position so clear. Then I walked past them back into the crowded dining room. I found Jack and Amanda, congratulated them once more with a practiced smile, and picked up my purse and coat. Neither of my parents followed me. Neither tried to stop me. Rain sheeted down outside, soaking my hair and clothes as I drove home. Each drop on the windshield blurred the road as though the world itself was dissolving. That night in my tiny apartment, I deleted their numbers from my phone. I unfriended them on social media, blocked their calls. The finality of it felt like slamming a door shut, one that had been creaking on its hinges for years. For the first time in my life, I would no longer measure myself through their disappointed eyes. I was free and utterly alone. The silence after I cut my parents off was deafening. At first, it was liberating. No more dinners where my work was dismissed, no more phone calls reminding me that I was falling behind. But as weeks turned into months, the absence pressed down on me. Holidays came and went. I scrolled through social media and saw photos of Jack and Amanda smiling beside my parents at Christmas dinners, summer barbecues, charity galas. My own feed was bare pictures of seedlings, community gardens, the occasional shot of my colleagues. I had chosen this distance, but the loneliness was sharp. So I buried myself in work. Urban Harvest became my refuge. I threw myself into every project: rooftop gardens, school plots, neighborhood workshops. My designs for vertical growing systems caught the eye of colleagues, and soon Professor Diana Williams reappeared in my life. She came to volunteer at one of our sites one Saturday, her hands in the soil, her eyes lighting up as she examined the towers I'd refined. "You've solved the circulation issues we debated years ago," she said, crouching to inspect the tubing. "Cassie, this isn't just nonprofit work. This is scalable. Have you thought about taking it commercial?" I laughed, brushing dirt from my palms. With what money I can barely pay rent. But she didn't laugh. Instead, she studied me for a long moment, then said, "I want you to meet someone." That someone was Marcus Chen, founder of a sustainability-focused investment fund. When I first shook his hand, I expected polite dismissal. But Marcus walked through the garden with an analytical eye, asking pointed questions about nutrient ratios, water usage, scalability. 2 weeks later, he invited me to pitch to his investment team. That invitation terrified me more than any family confrontation ever had. For nights, I sat hunched over my rickety desk in the studio apartment surrounded by blueprints and research notes. My stomach growled from too many skipped meals. I scribbled projections, erased them, resketched. At 3 a.m, I would collapse onto my mattress, whispering to myself, "Am I crazy?" Dad said this would never amount to anything. What if he's right? But then I'd remember Grandma Eleanor's words, "Promise me you won't let them bury your gift." I walked into that pitch meeting trembling. But when I began speaking, when I showed them the data, the prototypes, the photos of children, harvesting lettuce from a food desert block, the words flowed with a conviction I didn't know I had. Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "This isn't just a community initiative. This could change urban agriculture." 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. $75,000 in seed funding, a workshop space, a part-time engineer, a chance. That's how Vertical Bloom was born. The early months nearly broke me. I worked 80-hour weeks, splitting time between technical development, business operations, and desperate client outreach. I stopped eating properly, survived on coffee and ramen, my hands perpetually ink-stained from sketching system designs. There were nights when the fear consumed me. At 2 a.m. alone in the workshop, I'd stare at the half-finished towers and whisper, "What if Dad was right? What if this is just glorified gardening?" But then I'd flip through Grandma's old notes, her neat handwriting reminding me, "Give back to the land. It will give back to you." The first breakthrough came when a regional grocery chain agreed to pilot one of our systems inside their store. Customers could watch herbs and lettuce grow in real time, harvested directly onto their plates. The marketing appeal was undeniable. When the installation made the local news, I sat on the cold floor of my workshop, tears streaming down my face. It was small, yes, but it was proof. Soon, I hired my first 2 employees. Layla, a brilliant mechanical engineer who refined our irrigation systems, and Ryan, a horticulturist who expanded our plant varieties. They weren't just employees, they were comrades. In the long nights at the workshop, they became a kind of family. One night after a 12-hour installation, we sat on the concrete floor eating takeout. Zoe, my best friend from college and unofficial cheerleader, raised her soda cup and said, "To Cassie, who's building the future while the people who should have believed in her never did." I smiled through tears. That moment meant more than any toast at Jack's engagement party. But the shadow of my family lingered. Amanda posted a photo on social media, a champagne glass in hand, captioned, "So glad Jack chose real success. Not everyone can handle the pressure of the big leagues." The comments beneath twisted like knives. Some people just play in the dirt. Glad he's not wasting potential like others. I stared at the post for a long time, heart pounding before finally closing the app. I refused to engage, but the sting stayed. Instead of fighting, I doubled down. We pushed out 3 more installations. Local restaurants began calling. Vertical Bloom's name spread in niche sustainability circles. And slowly the loneliness began to shift. My team, my colleagues, my friends, they became the family I chose. One evening, after finishing a system for a downtown bistro, Ryan clapped me on the back. You know, Cassie, someday your parents are going to walk into one of these gardens and realize they were wrong. I forced a smile. Maybe, but I'm not building this for them. And that was true. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working for applause. I wasn't trying to earn love that would never come. I was building something because it mattered, because it was mine. Still late at night, I sometimes caught myself staring out the workshop window, wondering if Dad could see me now. Would he still call me a failure? 2 years into running Vertical Bloom, the impossible started to feel possible. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were growing. Our systems had been installed in grocery stores, restaurants, and even a hospital cafeteria that wanted patients to see fresh herbs being cut for their meals. The media picked up the story, first local outlets, then national sustainability blogs. Investors called, clients called, people wanted to talk to me. The girl who once hid her science ribbons in a drawer was now being invited to speak at conferences. But success didn't mean comfort, not yet. My salary remained modest. Every cent I could spare, I funneled into a separate savings account labeled Farm Fund. I didn't tell anyone, not even Zoe or Layla. That account was my secret, my vow to Grandma Eleanor. From the first day she placed a trowel in my hand, I had dreamed of land. Not just patches of borrowed lots or rooftop gardens, but a space where I could plant rows of crops, test systems, and breathe in soil that belonged to me. I lived frugally still in the tiny studio with its cracked walls. I patched my jeans instead of buying new ones, skipped vacations, skipped luxuries. 30% of every paycheck went straight into Farm Fund. When I got small consulting gigs advising schools or startups on sustainability, I deposited every extra dollar. Some nights I would log into my online banking just to watch the number inch upward. The balance was slow but steady, like a seed pushing against the soil. Meanwhile, Jack's life glittered across social media. He and Amanda posted photos from their luxury townhouse in Lincoln Park, vacations in Italy, dinners in Michelin star restaurants. Mom and Dad appeared in the background of those pictures beaming. I never looked long, but sometimes in the quiet of my apartment, I wondered if they ever thought of me when the camera wasn't rolling. By the end of our second year, Vertical Bloom hit a milestone profitability. Modest, yes, but real. For the first time, I allowed myself a small indulgence, a 1-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. Hardwood floors, a working radiator, a little balcony where I grew herbs in pots. It wasn't a luxury townhouse, but it was mine earned without anyone else's money. Still, the Farm Fund was my true focus. By the time the balance reached enough for a serious down payment, I began calling real estate agents. Most properties were wrong. Too expensive, too far, poor soil, or developers hovering like vultures. Each not quite right made me doubt myself. But then one afternoon, my agent called with excitement. Cassie, I think I found it. 40 acres in McHenry County. Old farmhouse barn, rolling fields, perfect southern exposure. The seller wants to move quickly. I drove out the next morning. The farmhouse sagged under decades of neglect, peeling paint shutters. Hanging crooked, an interior trapped in the 1970s. But the bones were solid. The barn was weathered but sturdy, its beams begging to be restored. And the fields, oh, the fields, gently sloping, kissed by sunlight, whispering with the promise of growth. I walked the land alone, boots sinking into thawing spring soil. I crouched, scooped a handful of earth, and pressed it to my nose. Rich, fertile, feuilleté, waiting. My heart knew before my head did. This was it. The price was at the very edge of my savings, plus a mortgage that would stretch me thin. But I didn't hesitate. I made the offer that day. After tense negotiations, the papers were signed. 60 days later, I stood with the keys in my hand, the old farmhouse creaking behind me, the barn yawning like a sleeping giant. 40 acres of possibility, 40 acres of freedom. I walked to the center of the field as the sun set, the sky painted gold and crimson. I closed my eyes, lifted my face to the warmth, and whispered, "We did it, Grandma." For the first time in years, I felt her presence as if she were standing beside me, nodding in quiet approval. The renovation was grueling but joyous. Friends rallied around me. Zoe organized moving trucks. Layla and Ryan helped paint walls. Other colleagues carried boxes and furniture. On weekends, we hammered, sanded, patched, laughed. The barn became our workshop and testing ground. The farmhouse, though, outdated, slowly transformed. Hardwood floors revealed beneath carpets, beams polished, a wide porch restored to its former charm. The first night I slept there on a mattress on the floor, I stared at the cracked ceiling with tears in my eyes. No crystal chandeliers, no catered galas, no applause, just me, my dream and land that finally belonged to me. A month later, when the renovations were mostly finished, Zoe organized a gathering. Friends sprawled across the porch with pizza boxes and beer bottles, laughter echoing into the fields. To Cassie, Zoe toasted, raising her bottle, who knew exactly what she wanted and never gave up, even when the people who should have supported her most couldn't see it. Cheers rose around me. My throat tightened, tears slipping down before I could stop them. In their faces, I saw the family I had chosen, the people who lifted me without condition. Yet as the laughter swirled and the stars blinked awake above us, a small ache pulsed in my chest. A hollow space where my parents and brother should have been. I had achieved everything they said I couldn't, but they weren't here to see it. The universe, however, has a twisted sense of timing. The very next morning, as I unpacked boxes in the kitchen, I heard a car crunching up the gravel driveway. Expecting one of my friends who'd left something behind, I wiped my hands and stepped onto the porch. But it wasn't Zoe. It was Jack. His sleek black SUV glinted in the sunlight, Amanda sitting in the passenger seat. They slowed to a stop, staring at the farmhouse and the fields behind me. Confusion rippled across their faces, then surprise. Jack rolled down the window. Cassie. Is this yours? I stood frozen on the porch, keys still in my hand, heart pounding. This was the moment I had never prepared for. Jack stepped out of the SUV slowly, Amanda trailing behind him in a cream sweater and designer flats that looked absurd on the gravel drive. His eyes swept over the renovated farmhouse, the barn, the stretch of green fields catching morning light. Is this really yours? He asked, voice caught between disbelief and awe. I nodded, gripping the porch railing. 40 acres, the house, the barn, all mine. Amanda's smile was polished but tight. It's beautiful, she said, her tone genuine enough, though her eyes flickered, measuring. So unexpected. We stood in silence, the weight of 2 years of no contact pressing down like humidity before a storm. Finally, I sighed and gestured. Come in, I just made coffee. Inside, Amanda's manicured hands brushed across the old oak table. I'd refinished her expression, betraying surprise. Jack lingered in the kitchen, eyes moving from the mason jars of herbs on the sill to the framed newspaper clippings of vertical bloom that hung beside technical sketches. You really built all this? He asked, his voice quieter now. With help, I admitted. Friends. My team. But yes, this is my life now. We settled at the table. The coffee steamed between us, the silence awkward. Jack shifted uncomfortably before blurting, I've thought about reaching out so many times. After that night, after what Dad said, I should have... Yes, I interrupted sharper than I meant to. You should have. He winced. I know. The words hung heavy and raw. For years, he'd been the golden son, the one shielded by their praise. For years, I'd been left to fend for myself. I didn't know what to say. He continued, staring into his mug. I stood there and let him call you a failure, and then I took their money. For the condo, and every day since it's eaten at me. I searched his face. The arrogance I remembered was gone. In its place, something unfamiliar, shame. Amanda placed a hand on his arm. Jack's been questioning a lot lately, she said softly. His career, the choices we've made. That night, it wasn't fair to you. Jack exhaled, shoulders slumping. I'm good at my job, Cass, but I don't love it. Every morning I put on the suit, sit in that office, and I can hear Dad's voice in my head telling me this is success. But is it? Or am I just living his dream instead of mine? His admission stunned me. Jack, who had always seemed perfectly content in his role as the golden child, was unraveling before me. What would you do instead? I asked carefully. He shook his head, looking suddenly younger than his 35 years. I don't know. But then I see you doing something you love, building this from nothing, and I think maybe I made the wrong trade. Amanda's eyes softened, but there was a sharpness in her tone. It's easier to question choices when you're standing in a house you built without anyone's help. Not everyone could have done what you did, Cassie. For a moment I bristled, but then I saw her expression envy, not malice. A woman trapped in the same gilded cage Jack had chosen. After a long silence, I pushed back my chair. Come on, let me show you. We walked through this farmhouse sunlight streaming across polished floors, herbs hanging to dry in the kitchen. In the barn, I showed them the prototype systems, vertical towers humming with water pumps, trays of lettuce, and herbs bursting with green. This is incredible, Jack murmured, running his fingers along the irrigation tubing. He wouldn't know what to say. That's the point, I said quietly. Out in the fields, Amanda shaded her eyes against the sun. It's peaceful here, she admitted, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, like the world slows down. Jack bent, pulling a weed from between rows of test crops. His suit jacket looked ridiculous against the dirt, but for the first time I saw him without armor, just my brother. We lingered there, the silence different now, no longer strained but contemplative. Finally, Jack straightened, eyes locking with mine. Dad was wrong about you, Cass. So wrong. You're not a failure. You've built something amazing. The words hit harder than I expected. I had long stopped craving my father's approval, but hearing them from Jack, words he should have said years ago, brought tears to my eyes. Before I could respond, Jack pulled out his phone. He needs to see this. He needs to understand what you've done. Panic surged. Jack, don't! But he was already dialing. The line clicked, Dad's voice spilling through on speaker. Jack. Everything okay? Weren't you driving back from Amanda's parents? Dad, Jack said, his voice urgent. You need to hear this. Cassie's not a failure. She owns 40 acres in McHenry County. She built a company, employs clients in multiple states. Everything you said about her was wrong. Silence stretched on the line. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was flat, almost uncertain. You're with Cassie? Yes, Jack pressed. You and Mom need to see this. You need to admit you misjudged her. Another pause. Is she there? Can I speak to her? Jack glanced at me. My throat tightened. The years of silence, the words failure, the envelope handed to Jack while I sat invisible, they all rushed back. I shook my head firmly. She's not available right now, Jack said. But I mean it. You were wrong. I see, Dad replied, his tone unreadable. Thank you for letting me know, son. Your mother and I will discuss this. The line went dead. Jack slipped the phone back into his pocket, looking at me apologetically. I'm sorry if that crossed a line. I just couldn't let him keep thinking you're struggling. I inhaled slowly, my chest tight. It's done now. But Jack, listen to me. I didn't build this to prove Dad wrong. I built it because it matters, because I believe in it. He nodded, voice low. That's what makes it even more impressive. You didn't do it for him. You did it for you. We walked back to the house together, Amanda trailing behind, quiet and thoughtful. Before they left, Jack hesitated at the porch. I'd like to stay in touch, Cass. Not for them, for us. I've missed having a sister. I studied him, searching for sincerity. I found it in his eyes. I'd like that, I said softly, but only if you respect my boundaries with Mom and Dad. This whatever we rebuild has to be between us. He nodded. Understood. As their SUV disappeared down the gravel drive, I stood on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the barn. My hands still trembled from the unexpected storm of emotions, anger, relief, fear, hope. For the first time in years, the door to family had opened a crack. And though I wasn't sure yet whether to step through, I knew one thing: the ground beneath me was finally my own. A week after Jack's visit, I returned from the workshop one evening to find a sleek black Mercedes parked in my gravel driveway. My stomach clenched instantly. I didn't need to check the plates. I knew whose car it was. For 2 years, I had built this life without them. And now here they were, uninvited, standing on the porch of my farmhouse as though they'd simply dropped by for tea. Mom looked older, the kind of older you can't mask with facials or designer creams. Her hair was perfectly styled, but there were fine lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. Dad stood stiffly beside her, the picture of restraint in his tailored coat expression unreadable. Cassie, Mom said as I stepped from the truck. Her voice wavered slightly. You look well. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, crossing my arms. What are you doing here? Dad cleared his throat. Jack told us about your property, about the company. We wanted to see for ourselves. The words were careful clipped. Not an apology, just an explanation. 2 years of silence, and now you show up unannounced. My voice came out colder than I expected. Mom's eyes softened. We weren't sure you'd agree if we called first. She was right, I wouldn't have. For a moment, I considered turning around, climbing back in the truck, and driving until the fields behind me disappeared. But then I thought of Grandma Eleanor, how she'd told me not to bury my gift, how she'd believed my work had worth. This was my land, my home, my life. If they wanted to see it, they would see it on my terms. Fine, I said, flatly stepping past them to unlock the door. I'll show you around. And then we talk. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Mom's eyes darted from the refinished wood floors to the open kitchen shelves. You've done a beautiful job, she murmured, her tone genuine but cautious. The space has such character. Dad said nothing until we reached my office. On the walls hung framed articles about vertical bloom, technical drawings, and photos of our installations. He studied them in silence, his eyes narrowing, not in contempt this time, but in calculation. Jack mentioned you had systems in multiple states, he said finally. 15 employees plus contractors, I replied evenly. His lips pressed together. He had expected a hobby. What he saw was a company. We moved to the barn next. I explained our newest irrigation model, how it reduced water use by 60%. For the first time, Dad asked questions about scalability, patent protection partnerships. He wasn't dismissing me. He was evaluating me the way he would an investment. In the fields, the late afternoon sun slanted across rows of experimental crops. Mom touched the leaves of a tomato plant almost tenderly. Why are these rows side by side? We're comparing nutrient density and yield between methods, I explained. Traditional rows hydroponic and our modified system. She nodded, as if trying to understand a language she had ignored for too long. By the time we returned to the farmhouse, the air between us had shifted less hostile, though still fragile. I made coffee out of ingrained politeness, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where friends had toasted me weeks before. Now across from me sat the people who had once called me a failure. Dad was the first to speak. Your operation is impressive, clearly more substantial than we realized. I set my mug down. That's because you never asked. You decided my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your definition of success. Mom placed a hand on his arm, a gesture I knew well, her way of softening his words. We were concerned about your financial security, she offered carefully. We didn't understand you were building something with such potential. Potential. I repeated, anger simmering. My work had value even when I was making $28,000 at Urban Harvest. Value doesn't start when the money does. Dad shifted uncomfortably. His voice was lower now. Perhaps we focus too much on conventional measures. Profit, salaries, promotions. I didn't consider that there might be other ways to measure achievement. It was the closest I had ever heard him come to admitting fault. Mom's eyes dropped to her coffee cup. Her voice was quiet when she said, We didn't correct him. When he called you a failure, that was wrong. The words hit me like a punch. They had never acknowledged that night so directly. My throat tightened. Yes, it was wrong. And it wasn't just that night. It was years of dismissal. Years of telling me Jack's path mattered while mine didn't. Dad's jaw worked, pride and shame warring across his face. Finally, he said, I built my career on numbers, on clear returns. I used the same metrics with my children. That was short-sighted. He gestured toward the window, toward the fields. Your work has its own metrics. Sustainability, innovation, real impact. I didn't have the vocabulary to understand it, so I dismissed it. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was more humility than I had ever seen from him. Mom reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. We've missed you, Cassie. Finding out from Jack what you've built, it made us realize how much we've lost. Tears burned the back of my eyes. I missed you too. But I couldn't keep living under your constant disapproval. It was destroying me. For once, Mom didn't argue. Her eyes shimmered and her voice trembled. And the fact that we drove you to cut us off completely should tell us something about how badly we failed. Silence filled the kitchen. Heavy, raw, but different from the silence of the past 2 years. This silence felt like soil being tilled, painful, but ready for something new to grow. Dad cleared his throat. If we were to try again, what would that look like from your perspective? The question stunned me. I had expected inspection, maybe even begrudging respect, but this was a hand extended tentative. I steadied myself. It would mean respecting my choices, not because I've made money, but because my work matters. It would mean acknowledging the years you dismissed me and not repeating them. It would mean no more comparing me to Jack as though I'll always come up short. Dad nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. As they stood to leave, the moment still fragile, Dad paused at the door. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had a special connection to the land. I should have listened." The mention of Grandma Eleanor cracked something in me. For years, he had brushed her off as an eccentric influence. Hearing him invoke her name with respect this time brought tears spilling before I could stop them. I just nodded, unable to trust my voice. When their car pulled away down the gravel drive, I sat on the porch steps watching the sun set over my fields. The ache of old wounds was still there, but so was something new, something I had thought impossible. A door had opened, just a sliver, just enough to let the light in. The weeks after my parents' visit felt strange, like standing in a house where the furniture had been rearranged. Nothing looked the same yet. Everything was familiar. We weren't healed, not even close, but something had shifted. Dad had admitted, however reluctantly, that his measures of success weren't the only ones. Mom had acknowledged the hurt she'd allowed. For the first time, they had seen me not as the family disappointment, but as someone who had carved a path worth respecting. Jack began visiting the farm more often. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with Amanda. He'd roll up his sleeves, surprising both of us, and kneel in the soil to help plant or haul equipment in the barn. Once, as we set up irrigation lines, he laughed. If Dad could see me now, he'd think I'd lost my mind, suit and tie, Jack covered in dirt. But there was pride in his laugh, not shame. He was discovering something he hadn't found in glass towers or investment portfolio satisfaction. The harder part was with my parents. We began cautiously with short phone calls, polite questions, updates about the business. Mom visited once with a casserole, commenting on how charming the farmhouse looked, how strong the barn beams were. Dad mailed me articles about sustainability initiatives, his way of showing he was paying attention now. Then one evening, over coffee on my porch, they made a proposal. "We've been reflecting," Dad began, his voice measured, "on how we supported Jack financially and how we failed to support you. It wasn't equal. It wasn't fair." My heart pounded. I knew where this was going. "We'd like to make it right," Mom said gently. $230,000, the same amount we gave Jack, for you to use however you wish. The number sat between us like a stone dropped in water, rippling with memories. That check handed to Jack at the engagement party had been the moment I realized exactly where I stood in this family. Now here it was offered to me, years later, like a bandage for a wound that had already scarred. I looked out at my fields, the crops shimmering in late afternoon light. I thought about the sleepless nights, the ramen dinners, the times I almost quit. Every inch of this farm, every system Vertical Bloom had installed, every scrap of progress I had fought for without their help. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, finally my voice steady, "but I don't need the money for myself. The business is thriving. The farm is secure. I've already proven I can do this without your check." Dad's shoulders stiffened, disappointment flickering across his face. But before he could speak, I continued. "There is something we could do with that money. Something that would honor someone who believed in me when you didn't." I saw Mom's eyes widen as realization dawned. I want to create a scholarship for young women pursuing degrees in sustainable agriculture and environmental science, especially those whose families pressure them to choose something more respectable. And I want to name it after Grandma Eleanor. Silence. Then Dad exhaled, his jaw softening. She would have liked that, very much. She always said education should open doors, not close them. In that moment, something shifted in him. The pride that had always been so rigid, so conditional, cracked just enough to let grief and humility in. Over the next months, we worked together, my parents and I, to establish the Eleanor Henderson Scholarship for Innovation in Sustainable Agriculture. It was awkward, sometimes tense, but it was a project we could agree on. For once, our efforts aligned not with appearances, but with purpose. The launch event was small, just family, close colleagues, and a few university representatives. Standing in front of the banner bearing my grandmother's name, I felt her presence as vividly as if she were standing beside me, soil under her nails, pride in her eyes. When I spoke, my voice caught. "This scholarship is for the girls who hear what I heard growing up, that their passions are impractical, unworthy a waste. This is for them to know they're not failures, that their work matters, that the world needs them." Mom cried openly. Dad's eyes glistened, though he quickly blinked the tears away. Afterward, Jack pulled me aside. "You know, Cass, watching you build this, your farm, your company, this scholarship, it's changed me. I used to think success was about climbing ladders. Now I'm not so sure. I've joined the board of a nonprofit for food security. It feels right." I smiled. "Grandma would be proud of you too." That autumn, I hosted the first family dinner at my farmhouse. The air was crisp apples ripening in the small orchard I'd restored. The meal was made almost entirely from the farm roasted vegetables, fresh herbs, apple pie. We ate on the porch, laughter mingling with the sound of crickets. There were still unhealed scars, still words that couldn't be taken back. But there was also something new space for authenticity, respect, and maybe eventually forgiveness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dad looked out at the fields. When you first told us you wanted to study environmental science, I imagined something abstract, theoretical. I never pictured this. He gestured toward the land, the barn, the thriving crops. I couldn't see what you saw. That was my failure, not yours. The words caught in my chest. They weren't an apology in so many words, but they were the closest he had ever come. Mom slipped her arm through mine, her voice soft. We're learning, Cassie. Slowly, but we are. I looked at them both, then at Jack and Amanda across the table, and finally at the land stretching beyond the porch. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval. I had built my life, my success, my happiness on my terms. And now if they chose to walk beside me, it would be because they finally saw me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Later that night, standing alone in the fields, the cool earth beneath my boots, I whispered to the sky. I didn't need their check. I didn't need their applause. I just needed to stay true to the seed you planted, Grandma. And I did. The wind stirred the leaves, and I could almost hear her voice in it. The world needs people like you. I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time in my life, I felt whole.